His farm has never used biosolids and very few pesticides. So why does farm owner Jerry Grabarek's blood contain high levels of PFAS, the forever chemical? He tells us what he thinks is causing it. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. Jerry Grabarek is the owner of Preston Farm, famous for its corn maze, and he is also a selectman in the town of Preston. His family has owned Preston Farm for over 100 years, and in that time he says they've never used biosolids or sludge on the land and very little pesticides. So when Jerry decided to have his blood tested for the forever chemicals PFAS, he was surprised to learn he had very elevated levels of the toxic chemicals in his blood and has been fighting a war with the Department of Public Health, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection here in Connecticut to get them to test his farm to see where the PFAS is coming from. To date, they have not done so, and Jerry believes an incinerator that's about 2.5 miles from his farm could be where the PFAS is coming from. We're joined by Jerry Grabarek, the owner of Preston Farms. We're actually sat in the field. It's a very nice day today, Jerry. Thanks for inviting us down. Now, the reason we're sat in one of your fields is because we're going to talk to you about your concerns about PFAS, these forever chemicals that we're hearing more about, and the fact that you feel that a local incinerator, which is only about 2.5 miles away as the crow flies from the farm, you feel that emissions from that have actually settled here on the farm, and ultimately when you had your blood tested, you found that you've got high doses of PFAS and PFOS, correct?
Correct.
Talk to us about what started this all off. Why did you think that the incinerator was causing an issue and that made you then go and have your blood tested?
I originally had my blood tested for two reasons. The first was that the Connecticut Tumor Registry, in the years from 2010 to 2014, Preston males had 3 times the state average of renal cancer. I asked the DPH for the tumor registry data. They break it down from 2010 to 2014, from 2014 to 2017, and 2017 to 2021. It's public information. Anytime there's a cancer case in the state of Connecticut, the physicians are required to report it. So Preston males had a rate of 58 per 100,000, and the state average was like 16 or 17. And then, to top it all off, the EEP, after years of telling me the incinerator was safe, that PFAS wasn't being emitted, that they burnt it at a temperature that destroyed PFAS, in November of 24, they updated their little blip on what they say about PFAS. And what happened was they admitted in that thing, and it's right in there, waste incinerators can cause atmospheric deposition of PFAS miles away from the plant. So here we are sitting 2.4 miles away from the plant, and even today you can feel the winds blowing from the southwest. That means that incinerator stack is coming right over us, right where we're sitting. And there's atmospheric deposition. That means it's like particles falling out of the air or falling in the rain. So I tested my blood because of those two reasons. First of all, because Preston had the one in the southeast corner of the town, and the prevailing wind direction is from the southwest, so it blows over the whole town the whole time. And the other reason is there's one in Lisbon, 2 miles from the Preston northern border. So what do we have that other towns don't have? 2 waste incinerators. So I said, let's look into this a little bit. I have asked for years for DEP to test the ash, test the slag. They actually dynamite the boilers, the slag out of the boilers, and or the lime in the baghouse filters. They have never tested anything. They say that, the tests aren't accurate, they can't do this, they can't do that. To me, it's just a bunch of excuses. And so I got my blood tested. My blood test came back at 19.9, total cumulative PFAS. All right. One of them, PFOS, was 8.3, and the other one, PFH times S, was 9.2. Those two combined were over 90% of my total PFAS load, according to a 9-function PFAS test that Quest Diagnostic had. So I went and had my blood PFAS tested. I plunked down $357 of my own. I didn't go through a medical doctor. I just said, all right, I'm going to test my blood. That was like on the end of December, got the results back, notified DEEP, and said, all right, I got my blood tested. It tested this level. What are you going to do? So they recommended to the DPH to do what they call an environmental and occupational health assessment. So I said, all right, I'll take them at their word. They're going to do this. I notified our Uncle's Health District, which is an 80,000 member. I was the first one to PFAS test my blood, and the only one as far as I know. I have an inquiry into the state DPH now. Has anybody else ever tested their blood and haven't got an answer? But they make it their life work not to answer me.
So you say that the Department of Public Health here in Connecticut is supposed to be doing this sort of test survey. Has anything more come out of that?
DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, recommended that DPH do this thing. They got the memo. And then I said, all right, let's wait a couple of weeks before I ask what's going on. So I waited a couple of weeks to ask what's going on. And the funny thing is, I asked the public health director of Uncle's Health, do you know anything about this? He said, oh, yeah, a gal named from DPH in the Emerging Contaminants Division named Patricia Bazaki is supposed to notify me. You know what I did? I rubbed my hands in glee, because this is the same woman that 10 months ago told me not to email her any more PFAS articles. So I said, oh, now she's got to contact me. So what happens was she doesn't contact me. She punched it off to another person, a Miriam Miller, who works for DPH, who at least will answer me once in a while. So after about 3 weeks, I started emailing them. I said, what's going on with this? And then with the EOHA, that's the acronym for it, what's going on with it? And she said, oh, I'll look into it. And then because they didn't answer my emails, I got to the point where I said, all right, I'm going to call them. So every Monday I would call her office, this Miriam Miller's office, and much to my dismay, a lot of times I got the standard answer, oh, we're still on COVID protocol, we're not in the office. If you can believe that 4 or 5 years later. Okay, granted, okay, that's not my problem. On January 30th, I did get Miriam Miller on the phone. She answered the phone. I said, Miriam, what's happening to my EOHA? She said, oh, they disbanded that program. It took a month for them to tell me that they disbanded the program? Give me a break.
So basically what you're saying is nothing has come out of this. You've got no answers at all.
No answers whatsoever. I really want to know what's causing it.
Just for the listeners, we're just going to paint a little bit of a picture for them because, as we said, PFAS has been around since the 40s, but I would say only within about the last 5 or 6 years has it really started to get a lot of media attention, and we're still trying to understand the full ramifications of it. But your farm has been in your family for over 100 years. One of the things when it comes to farms that has been reported is the use of biosolids, which, of course, have shown that they've been contaminated with PFAS. We've seen farms not only here in the northeast, certainly like in Maine, where farmers used it unknowing that it was contaminated and then ended up having to have like entire herds of cattle destroyed and dairy farms closed down. So we know it is an issue. You, however, say that you've never used biosolids on this farm, correct?
Correct. Never used You know why I never used biosolids on the farm? I was in Connecticut College in the late 70s. I had a professor down there, Dr. William Nearing, and I took a bioecology. It was a combination of botany, biology course. And I took it with him, and he said to me, once he found out I was a farmer, I was a star student of his, because I was different than the students down there.
Sure.
Totally different background. So I was down there, and I went down there, and he had said to me, this was before sewage sludge was even on anybody's map. He said there was a nursery down in London called Vercade's Nursery. They spread sewage sludge on it to grow bedding plants, and it turns out it got contaminated with heavy metals, cadmium, lead, arsenic, the basic stuff. So when I call them sludge jockeys, because that's who I call them, that they were sludge jockeys, they weren't from Connecticut. Connecticut could not land apply its municipal sewage. They have to burn theirs. So it was from Casella Waste out of Boston's Deer Island plant, and the salesman was out of New Hampshire. And I swear to God, in the early 2000s, late 1990s, one of them would stop every 6 weeks plying their wares, and of course we didn't accept it. And other people didn't. As far as Preston, I know, nobody really took any. But up north, they used a lot of it, because I have it from a DEP personnel who said they spread 66,000 tons in Connecticut of sewage sludge. I don't call it biosolids. To me, it's sewage sludge.
Sure. No, let's call it what it is so that
let's call it
so people understand, because it's actually made from wastewater products and all sorts of things.
Well,
so of course,
biosolids makes it like it's some kind of green, great. It lends a different air to it. Actually, it's just sewage sludge. That's what it is. It's like the solids they left if they pumped out of your septic tank and spread it all over your farm.
The other thing, of course, is we know that PFAS in drinking water has now become a big thing. Certainly here in Connecticut, they are looking into it. You have, of course, water that runs across this property, but you say that you've had that tested to a certain degree and nothing particularly abnormal was found?
I tested my farm water because that's my main drinking water source. Even though my home's not connected to it, I'm down here all the time. I drink the water, I make coffee out of it. But that water, according to the Cycle Pure Water test, was undetectable for any type of PFAS. And that's like a 39 function test. It's a test for a lot of PFAS. And there was no PFAS in it. So I decided to test the brook that runs through the fields. It originates north of us, has about a 600-acre watershed, and I tested that after a rain, and that was loaded with PFAS. The PFOS number was 128, which I thought was high. Sent that to DPH and DEP, and they promptly answered me back, you have to hire an engineer to do it before we look into it. You can't do this yourself. You have to spend the $600-700 for a sample and then have an engineering firm, take the samples. We don't rely on data from one testing off of one stream. I'm saying, if it's a screening tool, aren't you people at least bit interested? Don't you think they would be?
So the water from the brook, have you ever used that for anything on the farm?
The cows drank out of it years and years ago. In 1996, I switched to rotational pasture, and I put a plastic 3/4-inch water line so they drank out of it. They didn't drink. I wouldn't let them in the streams because cows and streams don't mix, especially if there's trout in there. They poop in it. They're not clean animals. And if it's warm, they'll just sit in there because they like the water. It feels cool on them. So I didn't let the cows drink out of the stream. And that was since 96 when I switched to rotational pasture. But the thing, I have to mention this, the thing about the PFAS is because DPH, Yale School of Medicine, nobody knew a physician in Connecticut who had any experience with PFAS. Which didn't surprise me, seeing I was the first one in an 80,000-member Uncas Health District to test my blood for PFAS, that they wouldn't know about it. To me, it reminded me of Lyme disease back in the 1980s when it was first making the rounds people were having. My wife happened to get Lyme disease. It took us to demand a Lyme disease test from a doctor. They weren't going to do it. And it's the same way with the PFAS. They don't know. Credit to my own primary care physician. When I was in his office, and they had emailed me the results, and he was standing right there while he read the results, and the first thing he asked me, were you ever a firefighter? Yeah. So he knew. I sent DEP my thing. First of all, I never used sewage sludge. I never was a firefighter. I never used, the other source could be insecticides, pesticides. I never once sprayed any crop in here with an insecticide or a fungicide ever. I do use a herbicide. It was custom applied. In other words, it wasn't me spraying it. It was some custom applicator would come in and just do it all. I'd be miles away. I just left. That was it.
So you said that was a herbicide that was used?
That was a herbicide that was used. And then I didn't use Roundup. Roundup is a contact herbicide, and most of the time, back in the day, they added what they call a surfactant to it, and the surfactant, 9 times out of 10, had PFAS in it. Because it makes it would go.
But you're saying you never used it?
I never used the Roundup to grow a crop here. I never used Roundup Ready corn and sprayed the corn after for weeds with Roundup because I didn't. First of all, it was the Monsanto, the cancer stuff it's just been going crazy over the past couple of years.
So let's turn to the incinerator because I suppose really at the end of the day, the only thing that is left is pollutant from the air. And as we've said, there's this incinerator, which is very nearby. Now, you were interviewed, and there was an interview that was printed in an outlet called Undark, and they did a lot of investigation as well. They have spoken to the owners of that incinerator, and the owners, quite understandably, have said, yeah, we probably do burn things that contain PFAS. They've been quite open and honest about it. But the problem is that currently, under the Environmental Protection Agency, PFAS in the air is not considered to be a pollutant. That's something that they're actually tracking. So you're at a bit of a standstill until the law changes and somebody starts to check this. It could be that it is in the air, but nobody has the answers.
Yeah, two things I found out. First, like I said, I had to go to Maine to a physician because there wasn't Yale School of Medicine or DPH doesn't physician recommendations. So I went to Maine, and you were talking about it before, about the sludge spreading, because this doctor from Skowhegan Family Medicine, she has treated patients with high blood PFAS levels because of the sewage sludge spread up there. And she told me the most interesting thing I learned so far about this PFAS in milk, because it was that in cow's milk, was, Jerry, she said to me, she said, the two PFASs that are most found in contaminated farms up there in the milk are PFOS and PFH times S. The exact two that are 90% of my levels. Now I'm looking and I'm saying, so I had cows down here breathing in that, and she told me that cows, for some reason, tend to bioaccumulate those two. So then it's secreted in the milk. Well, there's all these do not eat fish advisories around for PFAS. Mainly it's just PFOS with the fish. But cows, she said, tend to bioaccumulate those two. And those two are the ones that are 90% of my levels, and I drank the raw milk out of this farm for 31 years. And besides the fact, the one that's the most in my blood, that PFH times S, they stopped making that in 2001 or something like that. 3M stopped making it. So here it is, 24 years later, I still have it. And then the whole thing is, of course, the blood test just tests you at that level at that time. How do I know what it was 20, 30 years ago? You wouldn't know.
What is it that you would like to see happen? You've done a lot yourself. You've explained. You've spoken to the Department of Environmental Protection. You've spoken to the Department of Public Health. What is it that you want them to do? Do you want them to come and actually visit the farm and maybe have more of a conversation with you? Because it sounds like so far everything's been done remotely, and we know that it is a problem. They do have a PFAS task force here in Connecticut as well, which the governor actually started, and that was started after a load of the foam, the firefighting foam, was discharged into the Farmington River a couple of years back and heavily contaminated the river. And there are mechanisms here in the state. So what is it that you want people not only listening to this, but also possibly officials from the state agencies? What do you want them to do?
I want them to randomly blood test more residents in the town of Preston in a circle around the incinerator. So start off a half a mile, start off right down next to it. Just test a few people's blood. See if there is something there. Because, look, my level is 19.9, and of course the DPH recommends not to blood test people. I don't know if you know that or not. They recommend do not blood test yourself for PFAS, because they really, if it comes in high, what are they going to do? They don't know how to answer you. So they say, it's better if we don't know. Basically what they say, it's better if we don't know. And I'm saying, all right, so PFAS is linked to a lot of cancer, especially in males, renal cancer, prostate cancer, kidney, liver disease, ulcerative colitis, linked to a lot of different things. But the cancers, isn't it? So with my level, which is just 0.1, because I don't know if you knew this, they treat people for 0 to 2 PFAS level one way. From 2 to 20 is another way to monitor. And above 20, and mine's 19.9, they monitor them closely. So even when I went to my doctor, the doctor I went to in Maine, she said, you should have your thyroid checked, you should have your urinalysis done, make sure that the kidneys are properly functioning right. And I'm saying, how would I know to test my blood for? How would I know that I have a high PFAS level if I didn't test my own blood? Because nobody else is going to do it. DPH is just putting blinders on their face and see. That's it. They're not doing anything. And then, so you hear about this. I personally know a few people in town who had renal cancer. All right. I just found out of another one who lives probably a half a mile from where we're sitting. She was just diagnosed with renal cancer. And I'm saying, who knows? Isn't your curiosity wouldn't it kind of get to you?
Don't you think it's also partly to do with the fact that, like I said, we're still trying to understand what is or isn't a safe level of these forever chemicals, but they've been going and they've been contaminating the land, etc., the water for so many years. Who do we turn to, ultimately, to maybe try and get some compensation? Because I'm going to juxtaposition this with the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
Now, we all know how bad that was, and just within the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen government agencies and state agencies finally act, and they've actually turned to these organisations that created these opioids, and millions of dollars have come in compensation. We've finally got somewhere with them. We know who some of these organisations are who created some of these products. 3M is one of those organisations, the DuPont organisation as well. But do you think it's because at the moment there is no mechanism, unlike the opioid situation, for anyone to be able to turn around and say, I'm suing you for the fact that I'm now contaminated with high levels of PFAS?
So every law firm that's doing these class action suits always, you have kidney cancer, you have this, is it associated with PFAS? I answered one of them that was in Atlanta, and I sent them my information. I said, I just have a high blood PFAS level. I don't have any cancers diagnosed yet. And they said, we won't take you. They won't take you. And then my other thing is I've always said this, that this PFAS is going to turn out to be worse than the asbestos issue. I'm on my own. And I'm on my own with the DEP and the DPH because they do nothing. And let's say the town does have a high renal cancer rate. She admitted to me. It does. They can look at the same figures I look at. They can come to the same conclusion. But they tend to stick their head in the sand and not do anything because they do not want to know. That's my opinion.
Jerry, it's been great talking to you. You are right. It is a big story. We are continuing to hear more about it. And it is a silent killer, and people need to know more about it. And I think you're absolutely right that it will be, as the years go by, one of the biggest health crises that this country will probably ever see. Jerry, thanks for being out there, getting your blood tested and raising your voice on the matter.
Thank you.
We spoke with ReWorld owners of the incinerator near to Jerry's farm, and they confirmed that the waste they burn does contain a mixture of items that contain PFAS chemicals, but they burn at a temperature that should destroy the chemicals and not release them into the air. ReWorld says they do not continuously monitor for PFAS either within or outside their facility, as there is no currently EPA-approved method to do so. The EPA also confirmed that currently PFAS in the air is not considered a pollutant, as against PFAS in drinking water, which is, and confirmed that although there are testing methods available to detect PFAS in the air, they have not approved any one method. A PFAS task force in Connecticut, led by the Department of Public Health and Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, continues to work in the state on various projects, none of which involve the testing or sampling of PFAS in the air. Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. The state of Connecticut has slipped 5 places to 11th in the nation for health system performance, according to the Commonwealth Fund's latest 2025 scorecard. Their report is based on ongoing tracking on how each state's healthcare system is working. Dr. Deirdre Gifford of the state's Office of Health Strategy says one of Connecticut's problems is a lack of primary care providers.
We need to work on strengthening our primary care system. That's something our office has been focused on as part of our healthcare benchmark initiative, where we've set a goal to reach 10% of healthcare spending on primary care. If you talk to pretty much anybody in Connecticut, they will tell you that they're struggling to get appointments with their primary care doctor. Our system is very fragile, and these measures really reflect that people are having trouble accessing the outpatient services that they need.
Connecticut also scored poorly on income disparity, ranking 37th in the nation when it comes to black and brown communities being able to access affordable health care. Gifford says a lack of pricing transparency and differing prices across the state for the same types of treatment are part of the problem.
We have very significant variation in what's charged for the same service across hospital systems. You might see 2 or 3 times a charge for the same service in one health system as it is in another. It's often not explained by any relationship to quality or health outcomes or the underlying cost of the service. The fact is that these prices are negotiated between insurance companies and providers, a very different level for one provider than they are at another.
Massachusetts was ranked number 1 in the nation, with every other New England state except Maine ahead of Connecticut in the latest scorecard. The Connecticut Hospital Association said the scorecard showed Connecticut's health system as a top performer nationally, and they are dedicated to continued improvement and equity in care delivery. At the time of recording this report, Dr. Deirdre Gifford was the Commissioner for the Office of Health Strategy. She's since retired from that position as of June 20th. The US Navy base in Groton unveiled a new dolphin sign at the base main gate 45 years after the first one was placed there. Craftsmen from the Mystic Seaport Museum were tasked with recreating the iconic dolphins, which are an important part of a submariner's training. Steve Gibbs is a former submariner from Groton and part of the Mystic Seaport Museum team that worked on the new dolphin sign, and said the project meant a lot to him.
This is a really significant part of a submariner's history. It's not trivial when they earn these dolphins. It takes most sailors at least a year of extensive training to get there. So it means a lot to me, and I'm sure it'll mean a lot to everyone that comes in this bay, so it was important to get it right.
Captain Kenneth Curtin is the 53rd commander of the subbase and honoured the craftsmen of the Seaport Museum and their maritime work.
The museum's shipwrights and craftsmen are a resource to be treasured. They've helped our Navy before. Most recently, the museum contributed to a restoration project of the historic ship Nautilus with the installation of the submarine's new topside wood decking. So it makes perfect sense that they become the go-to resource for subbase and our sign dilemma. Of those that executed it are part of what we celebrate today.
The original wooden sign was made by Visual Arts Inc. of New London back in July 1980 and over the years has become battered by the New England weather. The new dolphin sign is made from high-density foam and should last a lot longer. And staying with the subbase, and young enlisted military families at Subbase New London will be getting a helping hand with their newborns thanks to a non-profit called Red, White and Bundled. The organisation, which was started in 2015 in North Carolina, helps provide essentials to new parents of active duty military families. Susan Tillis is the founder of the nonprofit and was at the Connecticut launch event.
So I pulled together a baby shower in 6 weeks. That was our very first one in May of 2015, and we are close to $1 million in donations for our junior enlisted, and now includes here in Connecticut. This is the first time that we have expanded, and we get our thank you notes from these families. These thank you notes include messages that say this was the only gift that they got.
Tillis says the bundles are part of their outreach for new military families who often have little in the way of support because they have left behind family and friends to be deployed in the US or around the world. Captain Ken Curtin, the commanding officer of Subbase New London, says this type of assistance for his young junior enlisted sailors and their families is invaluable.
There's a newborn in the house or mom is pregnant, right? And so you're 19, you're pregnant, you're 2,500 miles away from family, and your spouse is saying, bye, I'll be back in 6 months. Oh, and by the way, no email, no phone calls, right? On the submarine force, you don't have that. So sometimes the spouses are really alone and unafraid.
The baby bundle kits range from small items like socks and diapers to larger items like bassinets, cribs, and even strollers. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms on demand and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.